that adding a competitive side to the subjective nature of poetry is important because it gives it a new energy and it gives it, like, you know, a new light vibrancy and makes it a lot more accessible and, like, marketable, and for want of a better word, it means it's easier to, like, to get more eyes on it and to get people more interested in it.
It's hard to put a mathematical number to an art form, and there's always going to be different opinions about poems. Some people don't like the certain style, but at the same time, I think adding that competitiveness and having that there will always challenge yourself as a writer to try different things.
Ultimately, as an art form, that's what poetry will be. It will be judged, and I don't mind someone judging my poems, you know, that brutally in front of me. That's fine, and you know, that's what will often happen behind closed doors with editors and with page poetry competitions. So I don't really have a problem with it being judged, but what I would say is that I don't think anyone should be too upset if they don't succeed in a slam, and I also don't think anyone should be too egotistical about winning one, because like, that's great and that's wonderful, but that's a couple of people's opinions.
I think that the competition is all fine so long as people just don't start taking it too seriously and don't start weighing their whole kind of careers and their kind of sense of personal worth and their enjoyment of their writing upon that.
Some of the best slams I've been at, nobody really cares who wins. All the poets sit in the corner, we chat, we cheer, we boo the judges, which is the most fun.
You can like go up to, you can have like a bunch of your poetry colleagues, friends, whatever you want to call them, and you can go, I'm gonna beat you tonight, and then it becomes this whole thing, and then you get to like get to know poets better, and then you get to drink with them afterwards, and you get to commiserate or, you know, celebrate a win, that kind of thing. Like, poetry slams are great for kind of interacting with different poets.
It's all friendly competition. It's not like, although like there is winners and there are losers, at the end I don't really feel like you necessarily, at the end of a poetry slam, you necessarily feel like you're a loser, because you've gained an experience, you've probably gained new people to talk to.
In a subjective art form, when you have a bit of friendly competition and artists pushing each other and poets pushing each other, it can raise the level of the art.
For me, one of the poems that I perform the most now, I wrote in 3 days before Scottish Nationals because I didn't have a poem under the time limit and because I really wanted to do a really kick-ass second round poem. I didn't end up making it to the second round, never did it, but I'm actually really proud of that piece. And it was a good challenge for me to see, can I write and memorize and perform a poem in 3 days? I never would have done that if I hadn't had the deadline of a slam. And so I think that they can generate a lot of creativity.
Open mic's nice, but sometimes people walk up and go, oh, I've just written this down. That's usually me. And you just mumble through it, whereas the slam forces you to either learn it or practice performing it. It forces you to really put yourself behind your poem and say, I believe this is valuable.
I think if it brings out an added level of performance and wanting to do your best, that's fantastic. If it means you're secretly wishing other people in the slam stumble on their words so that they get a lower score, that means you're taking it too seriously.
59 wakes up on the wrong side of the bed. Realizes all his hair is on one side of his head, takes just under a minute to work out that it's because of the way that he slept. He finds some clothes and gets dressed. And he can't help but look in the mirror and be subtly impressed how it looks rough around the edges and yet casually messed. And as he glances out the window, sees society is blessed with of 60 from across the street. Now 60 was beauty. Perfectly trimmed cuticles, dressed in something suitable and never rude or crude at all. Unimprovable, right on time as usual, more onky than a snooker ball, but like to play it super cool. 59 wanted to tell her that he knew her favourite flower. He thought of her every second, every minute, every hour, but he knew it would not work. He would never get the girl whose lord lived across the street. They came from different worlds. 59 admired 60's perfectly round figure. 60 thought 59 was odd.
I'm a bit competitive by nature. I prefer slams where you don't get given a certain score. There are some that just you get a winner and that's it, because I think they're easier for people with anxiety, and I wish that that's where I'd started, because I started at one that was quite intense, and I was up first on my first slam and didn't do very well, which freaked me out a bit. But for me, it's more about I want to be heard, and I just take any stage as that opportunity.
Because I came from a competitive background, you see, I have no problem with it being competitive. And, you know, you get hurt when you don't win, and you think you should, or somebody got away with something cheap, and you're like, boo. But then you can be here at the fringe, and that's exactly the same thing that's happening on a larger scale. And learning to cope with yourself and look after your emotions and look after, you know, your sort of injured child, and say, you know, come on, we can do it again. Again, it's a life skill, isn't it, as much as anything?
It's an odd thing that makes for an event, and the more that you've got people coming to an event and doing something that they're enthused by, that they wouldn't have gone to otherwise, it's great.
One person say the people that like poetry slams are the people that have won poetry slams, and I know myself at times, if you win, you think, yes, this system's perfect, they are able to recognise my skills. If you lose, you think, it's flawed because these people don't realise my brilliance and I haven't won. Most slams you go to, they will reinforce things, whether it's through the mantras you have of the point is not the points, the point is the poetry, or the best poet never wins, or if you go first, you're guaranteed to lose. There's certain things in place that mean you realise it's not everything.
I don't know much about the scene in England, but in Scotland it's less focused on the actual competitive aspect and more so on, bringing your A game and sort of improving in the sense that a poetry slam allows you to be able to give a sort of scoring to each poem, obviously, and therefore you're able to see this was a 5 poem, this was an 8 poem, this is where I should be going with this, if that's, you know, what you want to do.
I like Ginsberg. I like Ginsberg because he's stoned and queer, and I'm stoned and pretty queer, and probably have similar success rates as women, which of course culminate at 0. I like Ginsberg's like my poetry raw. You can keep your linguistic manifesto, I just want to talk about my feelings, and that sounds narcissistic. Then I guess I'm a narcissist, there's this arch on my chest that never shuts the fuck up, and I don't want to suffer alone when someone grips me by the hips to raise me from perdition. I want to talk about it, want to shout from the rooftops about the name, lodge my throat, the bandages up and down, my soul scream. Until my mouth tastes like sawdust and my eyes are red from the rain. Of course, societal convention deems us unwise. The man downstairs keeps calling the police, so a stage will have to do.
I'm all for an open mic. Turn up, do you, okay, have a limit, but say 5 minutes. And I don't like the competitive element. The idea of competitive art is anathema to me.
I think it's problematic. I think it's strange. Like, I think when you look at it like from a very outside perspective, you're like, why are we... Someone is spilling their heart out on the stage. Like, someone is digging up all of this stuff, like all these personal stories, they're just like splashing it out, and we're holding up a 7.2. It's bizarre. It's really bizarre. And I think if you walked in without the context, you would just be like, what is going on here? There has to be a thing when you walk into a slam, when you compete in a slam, where you're an audience member, where you have to like separate the competition from what's actually happening and realize that you're gonna see like great poetry and you may see really terrible poetry and the scores might not align, but the fact that everyone on that stage gets, like here it's 3 minutes usually, so everyone on that stage gets 3 minutes and they get that time for people to really listen.
If my body was a poem, it would be short, would laugh too loud, hold the microphone too close. If my body was a poem, the audience would not be still, would writhe and jive and shake and break, would shudder. If my body was a poem, it would be experimental. Not quite sure where each stanza ends because ends are too definite. And my body only knows flow, does not stop start. No, my body is an express strain, so it would express and be expressive all the same, but it would never get to a point.
I think it's interesting because poetry covers such a wide range of things. I don't know how often in music you might get a competition where you had somebody doing rock versus someone doing classical. Like, you know, you might have, you know, how well did you play that classical piece, or, you know, Battle of the Bands, which, you know, would tend to be rock. But I don't know, poetry covers such a wide thing, a wide range of different types of poems. I don't know how easy it is to compare. Like, as you say, it's subjective. So I don't know how easily you can compare, you know, something that kind of is much more rap influenced with something which perhaps, you know, might work just as well on the page.
It's difficult to put a number on art. I wouldn't class what I do as art. I class what I do as like putting words together, and sometimes people laugh at that.
Ideally, poetry shouldn't be competitive. We do poetry slams because it makes for an event, and that people like. I mean, why do people watch Bake Off? They watch Bake Off on television because they like the element of competition that makes it into something they want to watch. They wouldn't tune in for just somebody making a cake. And there's something in the human psyche that likes that. Whether that makes better cakes or not, I don't know.
There's going to be competition in the arts no matter what. It's an unfortunate reality. I mean, if you do page poetry, not even spoken word, you're going to end up fighting for funding applications. You know, there's so many page poetry prizes, the Forward Prize, all of that. Like, people are always competing for attention, for grants, for everything. And so I think, unfortunately, as much as we might not like it, competition is an inherent part of the arts world.
Competitiveness in poetry is a paradox. Of course, because how can you judge one person's bit of art against another? It's ridiculous, but like many things in this world, you know, you have these complete opposites.
Slams take away any veneer of purity that the arts have and just directly pit poets against each other, so it's much more obvious.
The judging is frustrating, there's no perfect way to do it, and it's kind of hard, but I think people put too much emphasis on what they've won and where they've competed and things like that, rather than just trusting the merit of their poetry. Because if you are winning slams, sure, it says something about you, but what's more important is that you're pursuing your art and that you're putting effort into it and that you're being sincere about it. That's so much more important in my opinion.
Art is subjective, so the idea of it being a competition is almost ridiculous.
Because that's the thing, like everyone's like it's subjective, but really there's also like, there's levels of subjectivity in it. There's subjectively like, oh, you didn't like it, that's your subjective opinion. But yeah, you didn't like it because it wasn't very good. Like, and it's not very good to so many subjective people that it's an objective opinion. So I think sometimes we can get lost in this, like, it's so subjective, how can you score it?
For me, I ignore all the cynicism, which means that the competitive nature is just fun, like, because I'm not doing anything differently than I would be at an open mic.
She needs a hip hop. A hip for the hippie, like a big hip hop to set my lovely Nana rocking, because her balance is shocking. Her body is knocking her. She's very unsteady on her feet. But she don't need no hearing test, she can hear a pin drop at 50 feet. All day long in a rocking chair, rocking to the beat.
There's not been a judging system that I've looked at and gone, that is completely wrong. Like, there's merit to all the kind of different ones, but I think audience judging is probably my favourite.
I absolutely think you need to involve the audience.
Allowing the audience to judge allows you to see if your poetry communicates, which is what poetry is really.
Unless we do involve the audience, unless we do bring people into this event, then we're going to be talking to ourselves as groups of poets, and that's what we shouldn't be doing.
Those are the people who are better at reading the audience. Those are people who are also, I don't think they're over-analytical. I think that a poet will see something very different out of a poem. A poet will pick apart a poem and analyse it too much, whereas an audience member will just listen to it and go, yep, I liked that, yep, I didn't like that. And I think that's actually a fairer way to judge.
The only slams that I've not enjoyed as much is when there's a chosen panel of judges who are judging it on their wealth of experience and literary merit, because then that becomes a bit closer to the thing I feel slams were rebelling against. I think it should always be random people in the audience, and the nature of that is someone might come along, have never seen a poetry event in their life, someone does a poem that in your mind is playing on quite a lot of cliches, but is powerful to that person, and they get a high score. And I think you've just got to, sometimes you just got to let it go.
There is something to be said about having that audience participation, because at the end of the day, audiences are the people there are more of the audience in society than there are poets. There's more people, ordinary people, right? So you're going to want to have that kind of judgment from the audience.
When you have something that's like your friendly neighborhood slam, and it's not very high stakes and it's not too competitive, and you know, the kind of slam that feels more like an open mic night, then having the audience judge is probably a good thing, and also it's a good way to get people involved.
I think for Smaller slams, it's obviously very good to have an outsider's point of view, in which case I think people who have never been to a poetry slam or audience members just generally are very good in order to gauge that.
I think it's where your mood is and where your ego is in terms of who you want to feel validated by at that point in time. So for me, right now, probably be an audience.
I'm not pregnant. Cue the party streamers for another monthly celebration of the liberation from your own body. A celebration at the sight of blood, a frenzy for the mensy when you see that you're ready to bleed for the next week. And you say women are faint-hearted. We're like sharks, thirsty for blood of ours and the blood of an infant, innocent flesh to grind, even though you say we're programmed to mind, cherish and raise babies. No thanks, man, I think I'd rather have scabies.
I would probably go with like guest poets who have been brought in and have, so long as it's a varied judging panel full of people who come from different disciplines and different backgrounds.
If I had to have a preference in the way that poetry was judged, I would rather it was judged by poets with previous experience in poetry.
Members of the audience is great, and that's fine, and there's totally a place for that, but if I was the poet on stage, I would prefer to be judged by them.
I think the audience-based one becomes quite a visceral response to the poems. And I think that's, although again it can be harsh because maybe a quieter poem, which has a lot of thought put into it, but takes a little bit more effort for the audience to listen to, might lose out to a louder one with a few cheap laughs in and whatever.
In the past, I have seen poets that I think are brilliant, and they're not like your kind of loud, outspoken, you know, in the night, in the moon and the stars kind of poet. You know, they're not that kind of flashy poet with all the stuff on their body and glow sticks or whatever. But they are honest, like I said before, and they write in a way that's quite technical, quite interesting. If you read it, you'd really love the poem. But they don't get that kind of recognition. I think a poet that would a judge that was a poet would receive them much better, and would give them some love as well, and give them a lot more credibility to slams, because those poets are brilliant. They just don't have that kind of, maybe, that kind of joke or that, you know, that topical reference.
I've seen people with really quiet pieces win slams because they've been so authentic that has won through the cheapness. So I think when you have more professional judges, then of course they are going to see those nuances more readily.
If you're going to judge something, make sure the judge have some indication the judge knows what they're talking about. You wouldn't ask me to write a review on the latest dance track out of Tokyo. I know nothing about the Japanese scene or dance music. So my opinion counts for less on that.
I personally prefer having poets judging a slam. I feel it gives a more consistent score. You get less problems with things like score creep, or if somebody is particularly good at, say, one particular gimmick, like being really funny or striking a really good relationship with one person in the audience, the audience may latch onto that in a way, whereas poets themselves may actually be focused more on the writing and the craft of the piece. And I think it's really important, again, with not getting distracted by that kind of extroverted style, it's really important to focus on the work itself.
Judges enjoy a certain amount of license by dint of the fact that they're not trying to compete in a popularity contest. And if anything, might be able to turn it to precisely the opposite.
For bigger slams, in terms of like national things, I very much would prefer someone who's very circulates in the scene and is very sort of aware of the standard that we adhere to, and you know what, very much, yeah, a sort of someone more professional in that sense, and is able to, because you want experts to judge things because they are experts in that for a reason.
I want to watch a millionaire wave their riches in your face. I want to race around your broken leg. I want to peg my IQ score to your front door. Look at all this shit that you can never do. I want to run over your second-hand bike in a cherry red Lamborghini. I want to hike up Everest, tell you how great the view is as you're chained to your office desk. I want you pressed to the glass, starving, marveling at every single sweet I select. None of them are for you. Look at all this shit that you can never do. I want to get married in front of you, and a man that you can never love. I want heaven above to tell you that my ass of a significant other is an angel beside your lover.
How a slam should be judged depends a little bit on the makeup of that slam, because you can have poets, specifically poets that are judging it, but often the audience is going to be made up of poets as well. And then also you have people perhaps who've never experienced live poetry before in the audience, who might be drawn in by certain types of poem again and not others. So I think it's good to get a blend.
I've been thinking about this recently, and I think what I'd like is a mixture of both as a thing. Like I was thinking of, say, like the mass appeal model of something like X Factor, whereby they have both judges, say specialized people, and they have that democratic element of having everybody being able to vote in.
So it's less regular to have audience judges in Scotland. It's just less regular, I think. You may have one or two in a room, in a judging panel of 5 or something, but we prefer to have poets or writers or, you know, musicians or something like that. The ones that I've seen which are audience judges, they lend less credibility to whatever happens, even though people say that it's, you know, it's all subjective and all these things. I prefer it when someone who knows a little more about the scene is judging. So probably my prefer is a bit of a mix, because the audience is obviously important and they get to influence within the scores. You know, they get a third allocated to them. But I like maybe like a panel of poet, like a strictly performance poet, someone that's closer to maybe page poetry, maybe someone writing about the industry, this is the old Rallying Broad, or someone who is maybe a previous slam winner, something like that, plus maybe an audience member. That'd be a really ideal panel.
I don't see a reason why you have to go either or, because I think both of them have strengths and weaknesses associated with them. So I don't see why you couldn't have a model in which you have people who have, say, some experience of it, and contrast that and complement that with lay people who maybe first time that they've ever seen a slam.
I mean, it doesn't matter.